Hello and welcome back to another video. This week's free death event includes Elite Dungeons and it couldn't have been a better time to get started. Whenever you're ready, grab your cup of tea, sit back, relax and enjoy. So, Raksha and all 3 Elite Dungeons are part of this week's free death event, and solely because of that reason you should be trying these bosses out if you haven't already. And even if you have done tons of Elite Dungeons or Raksha, you should consider to give them another go, because free deaths indirectly increase your profit per hour, because if you die every now and then you don't have to pay up or use onyxes to recharge your Ring of Death, which to be fair are fairly inexpensive right now thanks to Gold Rush Dungeon 3. But yeah, in this video I'm going to be focusing on Elite Dungeons simply because they are a level below Raksha in terms of PvM difficulty, with the exception of the final boss from Elite Dungeon 3 being the Ambassador. As we all know, pretty tough little shrimpy boy to take down, but in general Elite Dungeons are going to be easier than Raksha, and you can also do them in a group if you're struggling. Being a maximum of 3 players, that is. So why Elite Dungeons? Well, apart from the free deaths, pretty much all unique items dropped in Elite Dungeons have increased in price or value compared to 6 months ago. And if luck isn't on your side, you could consider to focus on Elite Dungeons 1 and 2, being Temple of Amnishi and the Dragonkin Lab. Reason being, the common loot can make up for the unique items you haven't received. For example, Draconic Energy is rising in value quite fast. Ancient Scales have been going up in value for years now and are over 1 million GP each, and as you may already know, Elite Dungeon 1, aka the Temple of Amnishi, is the king of consistent money without the need of real good RNG. That being said, it still helps, because the better your RNG is, the more skills you'll be getting. Now these skills are basically over 1 million GP each, and the average amount of skills you'll get per kill is 12 to 14.4 skills depending on the double chance. The maximum amount of skills you can receive is 220, given that you get a 110 skill drop, which is doubled. That's 220 million GP in a single drop. Now that's cool and all, but the average amount of skills you get is about 12 without the chance of doubling, meaning on average you should be getting 12 million GP per kill. Then take into consideration that you'll also be gaining a bunch of other drops while getting to Seiryu, and most players should be able to get 2, perhaps 3 runs per hour. Very good players could be able to get 4 or 5, but let's just focus on 2 runs per hour here. That's 24 million GP in just skills on average every single hour. That's a really good amount of money, and you don't have to rely as much on RNG as, for example, Elite Dungeon 3. Apart from being good money, Elite Dungeons are also a good way of learning different skills, including defensives and anti-stun mechanics, movement, reaction-based mechanics, minions and grouping up minions, DPS while moving, prayer flicking, placement, ability prioritization, adrenaline management, all that good stuff is included in all 3 Elite Dungeons. But which Elite Dungeon should you actually do? Well, that depends on your own personal preference, but I'm going to explain what Elite Dungeon is like in short. But before you do any Elite Dungeons, I highly recommend doing the Curse of the Blackstone quest, as it sets you through all 3 Elite Dungeons in story mode, allowing you to familiarize yourself with the bosses and maybe some of their mechanics as well, while taking basically no damage. Completing the quest will give you 10% reduced damage in all 3 Elite Dungeons. Incredibly useful because they do definitely hurt. From easiest to hardest, we have Elite Dungeon 2, Elite Dungeon 1, and finally Elite Dungeon 3, solely because of the Ambassador final boss. If you've never done Elite Dungeons before, Elite Dungeon 2, aka the Dragon King Laboratory, is definitely the one you want to pick. It's the easiest learning experience, but probably still tougher than what you've done before it. The bosses have mechanics that make sense, and sometimes you'll be able to counter these mechanics without having watched a guide at all. Elite Dungeon 2 is also the longest Elite Dungeon, but it can be sped up by using the Power Burst acceleration, allowing you to yeet around with your mobility abilities, and by being on a dragon's task. This will allow you to kill the bosses and minions, which mostly consist of dragon type enemies, much more quickly. Each boss has their own drop, and Draconic Energy is now decent money as well. Elite Dungeon 1 is the most consistent money for short time frames. Let's say you're going to be doing 4 or 5 hours in a single week, you'd want to pick Elite Dungeon 1. This is because you're not reliant on those rare drops as mentioned earlier. The dungeon itself is a lot shorter, but the final boss might take you some time to kill and is probably a big endurance test and punishes low DPS. Also, apparently it's really hard to Vuln Bomb Masuta, or maybe that's just me.
Pathetic one.
The third elite dungeon, known as the Shadow Reef, has by far the easiest trash mobs, and if you have a Salve Amulet E, you're going to be killing those undead monsters very quickly. The problem with this elite dungeon is that I can't recommend it if you're going to be doing it for a few runs unless you're feeling lucky. It's an all or nothing elite dungeon, as the only real big money you're going to be making is from the final boss if you get lucky with an Eldritch Crossbow piece. The probability of you receiving an Eldritch Crossbow piece is 1 in 55 for solo encounters, 1 in 167 for duos, and 1 in 266 encounters for trios. One thing you might not know is that if you complete each elite dungeon in consecutive order, you receive an elite chest at the end of the final boss from Elite Dungeon 3. If you're extra lucky, you'll receive an ultra elite chest, which gives you about 3 times the loot. The chest is worth around 3 to 8 mil on average, and the ultra elite chest is worth about 13 to 20 mil on average. The final 2 big tips I have, or actually one tip, is to check out the Elite Dungeon reward shop. This shop has lucky charms which you can buy to increase your profit per hour, as you'll be making back the dungeoneering tokens you use on these anyways by killing the bosses themselves and the mini bosses. And if you haven't already, you should definitely unlock the 750k token chest upgrade, making it so that you no longer need to toggle the chest for a chance of double drops for each boss, and then turning it back off to auto collection loot after having killed the boss. A true quality of life upgrade you should definitely grind out. Now if you want an actual guide for these bosses, be sure to check out my Elite Dungeon guide linked in the description below. With that being said, we've come to the end of this video. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like down below, and maybe if you consider subscribing, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.